Hi, welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for this another Thursday episode. So we're delighted again to be joined by Orlando Zucchetto on the podcast. We're going to talk about metaphors today. So it's great to have you back on again, Orlando.
Hey, Mark, as always, it's great to be here, mate. It's been, as we've just been discussing, it's been a busy week leading up until now, and fingers crossed it'll carry on being that. So,
exactly.
Look, I'm glad to be here, and welcome back to all the listeners.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks very much. And so we'll probably start off today's podcast because it's around metaphors. So can you explain to the listeners, please, what is a metaphor in NLP?
Well, absolutely. A metaphor in NLP is not unlike a metaphor anywhere else. It's a story that tells a tale, and it can be utilized to give a direct meaning. That is creating a comparison to this to that, but doing it through a story rather than just giving a direct instruction. And you can also have metaphors within metaphors. So that is, you can have more than one story being told by utilizing skills and language in communication that developed through NLP. So at the end of the day, it's the art of telling stories, allowing people to either consciously, unconsciously, or both make a comparison from the story to what it is that they're journeying through in their life at that time.
Yeah, well explained there. Well explained. Thank you, Orlando. Yeah. And the next question: how do you use them to help people in your practice? Let's say, like in a scenario where you're helping a client.
Well, I use the idea or the concept, the larger concept of metaphors in two primary ways. Those two ways are through idioms, which are those little short sayings that we just say, almost bordering on cliche, many of them, but carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, for example. Although there's a metaphor involved there, I'm not actually carrying the weight of the world. However, little sayings like that give us an indication into how people are representing what's going on for them. The other is in storytelling, and that is telling the story, for example, in hypnosis, creating a scene for the client, walking on a beach, listening to the waves, the salt spray, the sun, the relaxation, the da-di-da-di-da, and using that story to guide the client into a form of relaxation or other state that they're looking to achieve as part of what they're actually there seeing me to achieve. Those stories, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they can be used to directly create a very simple conscious comparison, or they can be used to embed other language, to indirectly influence using language patterns, tonality, hypnosis. Yeah. Don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hypnosis.
Yeah.
Good friend of yours. So the telling of stories, if somebody's going through a difficulty in their life and they're wanting to literally get to the other side of the problem, I might tell a story about traveling somewhere and part of the journey going over a bridge. And through that bridge, there may have been fog, there might be a river underneath, but as the fog clears, they get to the other side. It was only temporary, they knew what was there, they just had to carry on. So we're using the bridge as the metaphor, if you like, for the journey that they're on, what they're having to cross over and through, coming out of that fog and getting to the other side. That's a very short form, of course. Especially in the conversational work that I do with clients, I take a lot of interest in how people represent what's going on for them. And this is often in the realms of idioms. For example, if a client says to me, well, it's like I've got the weight of the world, I will directly say to them, well, what would happen if you put that weight down for a moment? How would that actually feel?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how they're representing the weight of the world. I don't know how they're seeing it. They might be giving me an indication physiologically of how they're feeling it by leaning down or pressure on their shoulders. But sometimes starting with the obvious or the simple is a really good place to start. And it's taking people's metaphors quite literally and answering the metaphor literally as a metaphor. So I can't see a way out. Well, is it too dark or something? Like, how are you imagining this? It's all overwhelming.
Yeah.
Something I hear often. I'm constantly overwhelmed. Well, if all this overwhelming's going on above you, what happens if you step to one side?
Important. Yeah.
Does that feel different? Does that look different? What would happen if that was to happen? And what would need to happen? What's preventing that from happening on a permanent basis? Other common ones are my hands are tied. And I might say, well, do you imagine that being with rope or chains or something else? Now, sometimes the client looks at me and goes, no, it's just a manner of speaking. And I'll look them straight in the eye and say, well, mine was just a manner of answering. There's a reason that we use language in certain ways, and it has something to do with how we're representing things to ourselves inside our mind. Sometimes we reflect on things in a metaphorical way. Well, in my experience, very often, by working with the metaphor as a literal metaphor, we end up many times not actually talking about the content specifically, that is the particular problem they're going through their life. Therefore, the client doesn't have to relive that problem. They don't have to share all the details with me. We can talk about the problem in the metaphor and what they would need to achieve. And this is very much in the realms of storytelling, The Hero's Journey, a wonderful book and a wonderful metaphor for life, where we begin our journey and we overcome certain adversities, and then we build strength and we become wonderful. Then there's a grand finale of a fight or something that must be achieved. And at the other end of that, the hero returns home and brings with the hero the learnings, their understandings, and they share with the community what they've learned on their journey and how they've grown from that. And this is very common in life. This is where do movies reflect reality, or is reality reflecting the movie? It's very engaging, because for many of us, we can draw comparisons in our own life through the lens that we've seen other people live their lives. And there's an element of the story that feels true, even if it's set in space and we haven't been where it is yet. Get that feeling. Fairy tales are very much the same. One of the earliest forms of communication of passing down historical data was through storytelling. Because by telling a story, it becomes more memorable. A lot of people use this as a memory strategy. If they need to remember a procedure at work, let's say an emergency fire drill, if they're given the job of being the fire warden, they might say, right, well, when I hear the bells ringing, I know it's time to put on my vest and heroically stride down the hallway to receive the clipboard. I then lead everyone to safety out into the car park, and I check off the names one at a time. And they'll see this happening in their mind over and over again. And it becomes very easy to remember the 5 bullet points of the job they have to do, because it's a story. Songs are often related as we used for passing messages. I know, being a musician, you relate to this very, very well. A very simple form of, and how powerful these are, is when I say "Bar Bar Black Sheep," your mind sets the other bit. I have no will for you, but that's okay. So one of my favorites, I must admit, and it just appeals to me, maybe because it works so well for me, is when a client says to me something along the lines of "da da da happens," and I get so wound up. And when a client says that to me, I'll often repeat it back to them and go, well, when you get wound up, I know you're going up, but do you go up this way or do you go up that way? Which way makes sense for you? And I'll get them to try on which way makes sense for them, or which hand it might be. And when they've demonstrated which way winding up makes sense, I'll have them start at the top and say, well, if you were wound up now, what would naturally happen if you came back down the other way?
Brilliant. So
winding down, as it might be. Now, it might not be, and very rarely is it the answer to the entire session, 30 seconds and you're done. Yeah. However, it teaches people very, very quickly that they can be in control of their internal processes by being aware of how they're describing them to themselves or other people, and looking for what would a difference or the opposite be, and trying it on. It only takes seconds and you've got everything to gain. So, so how do I use them? I like to think very effectively, and in a few different ways, but that's a really clear insight to the two primary ways that I'm processing for metaphors when I'm working with people, whether it's in coaching and therapy and hypnosis, and working with groups, by the way, telling a story to allow people to be on the journey inside their mind of that learning experience gives them a much easier set of reference points for going back and remembering what they learned.
Yeah. That's really helpful for anybody who's listening, Orlando. That's brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, because, for instance, if just say somebody wanted to run a marathon, like they just wanted it, they came to you and they kind of said, look, I don't know where to start. Like, I don't know what kind of training plan. I never really ran before. Could you kind of help someone in that scenario with metaphors?
Well, absolutely. And keep in mind, I've never run a marathon, and I've never coached a marathon runner in the mechanics of running a marathon. Yeah. So it'd be two pieces. Well, it'd be one piece of advice that I'd be quite insistent on, and the second would be information from that person. Number one, I would want to find somebody that has successfully completed marathons or trained other people, and I'd want to find out from them what the best way was. Now, ideally, I would find the most competent marathon runner or coach that I could possibly find, so I could draw from their experience, not have to learn 30 ways, find out from them of the 30 ways they've learned to train for a marathon, which one's the most effective, or which elements were most effective in the training. Now, from that, with the client, build a training schedule, possibly bringing in a professional coach of some description in the physical realm of running a marathon. Yeah. Now, once they've got a solid plan that makes sense in reality based on success, I would want to see that plan so I could talk to the client about something in their life that they have achieved that required similar steps to be taken. Now, excuse the pun of steps to be taken on a marathon. I'm sure there's a lot of them. But it may well be an example I can think of as a person that I know of who it was and is particularly successful in business. And I personally think very successful in their marriage with their children as well. And he began competing in triathlons, or at least doing them for fun. And then he wanted to give one particular triathlon a real crack. He really wanted to test himself for times, etc. The pleasure was, he had already done it for pleasure. Now he wanted to see what he could achieve. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him about it, and he had his training plan. He was in a community of people doing triathlons, so he had some great advice around him. And he said to me, I'm just a bit stuck on the idea if I can do this. Now, he's now a CEO of a very successful company of the New Zealand division of. And so I asked him the question, did you wake up one morning and know how to be a successful CEO? And he said, well, I don't know if I've had that awakening yet. I said, well, by all measures, you seem to be doing pretty bloody well. So what I would ask you was, if you look back, what was the first thing that you did in preparation to have the roles successfully that you're now doing? And he traced it back to, he had part-time jobs, then he had a couple of full-time jobs when he was younger, and then one got him on, his words, one got me on the path to this role. And so we mapped out the different jobs that he had and what he had to do in very high level form. Like, we didn't go into a lot of detail. The different jobs, and we basically created identified milestones that he went through, and then we mapped that against what he was doing or his plans were with the triathlon training. And when it came to the time for him to close his eyes and listen to a few ideas from another direction, I refed him back his story of the journey from the first role that put him on the path to success in the role that he was in, and simply mapped information from his training schedule across into it. Some of it directly, some of it, shall we say, not so direct. But again, we're feeding information consciously and unconsciously so that he can have full congruence in the belief that he can do this and will do this and is enjoying already being on that pathway, because he didn't start by coming to see me. We mapped back that he began getting on the pathway to do the triathlons with his interest in mountain biking. And from there, he met people that were running, and then the runners and the bikers were also swimming. And then there were some enjoyable sort of social triathlons events that they did. And it was within a social group of fitness bunnies, if you like, that he built the desire to actually move along and do this. So it was a wonderful realization for him that he was not about to start his journey. His journey actually started a couple of years later. He was already well on his way. Knowing that alone, he wasn't starting to do something, he was enhancing himself. And there are a few beliefs there that a little bit of adjustment, shall we say, was very useful for, with his own capability and whether he'd be any good at it, etc., etc. A lot of talk in the world about imposter syndrome at the moment. And, this is a CEO of a successful company, unsure of whether or not he could be a triathlete. He'd already successfully completed triathlons. So we had to find out, what does being a triathlete mean to you versus what you've been doing? And maybe it's time to update that, feel good about it, and then just get on with it. It was, I think, about 6, maybe 8 months. My memory doesn't serve me perfectly there. 6 or 8 months later, he successfully completed the triathlon. In his words, he successfully completed it because he gave it the best shot that he could. His overall time was what he wanted. I think it was the swim and the cycle. 2 of the events, swim and cycle, I think, were under the time he planned for. The other one, I think, was the run. Took him a little longer than he planned for, but the overall time was a success. And he's gone on to, every year he does the same triathlon, and his times generally get better. More importantly, he loves it. Absolutely enjoys doing it. And he would now describe himself as a non-professional, as an amateur triathlete. Whereas in the past, even though he had already done several, that wasn't a label he was giving himself. So, it's just a perception change, but for him, a very useful one.
Great. Yeah, because I love what you've done there, is bringing back to something that he's done successfully in the past, and kind of, that's a really good way that you've explained that. So because then he's brought it to his triathlon running, or triathlons. So that's really good, like really good.
Well, absolutely. I mean, everyone has been successful at things in their life, not one thing, things. And it may be as simple as successfully being able to dress yourself in the morning. Well, that might not be seen as the penultimate success, but depending on where you started from, that can be a huge measure of success. For one of my clients that unfortunately was in an accident, being able to dress himself was a huge step forward. And it led to the next thing, into the next thing, into the next thing. But I think that it's, I know from my experience that a lot of people give themselves a hard time about spending time recognizing what they do not do well or what they have done wrong, inverted commas. But they don't spend a heck of a lot of time looking at what they do successfully, and they are doing well and have done well. And interestingly enough, people that are generally more successful, or at least are happier, and they describe themselves as more successful, when you ask what they're focusing on, they certainly do notice where they can improve, and they invest time in actually stopping to recognize what they're doing well, to make sure that they enhance their perception in the future to do that even more, do more of what's working, and make adjustments to what's not working well yet. And it's just a different mindset, but it seems to provide some pretty incredible results.
Yeah, and like it's grand. Like then the stories would help. Like the stories they tell themselves, like metaphors, would really help in that way as well, would they?
Well, we all tell ourselves stories. I mean, depending on how deep in the rabbit hole you're tonight, our lives are stories. I mean, the future hasn't happened yet, so we're imagining that. So that's just metaphorical. It hasn't happened. When we look back to the past, we remember it how we remember it. It's not exactly how it happens. It's just from our lens, our perception. So it's a version of what happened, not exactly what happened. So you could actually say it's a metaphor. And in this present moment right now, we're seeing with our eyes, but our eyes are actually extensions growing out of our brain that measure light and send electrical signals to our visual cortex. And then something happens and we see what's on the outside, or at least what we perceive there to be. But if you've ever sat next to someone that's colorblind, you're both looking at the same thing, disagreeing on what you see, and you're both right.
Exactly.
It's just perception. So when we start giving up the need to define everything perfectly and specifically, and recognize the depth of metaphor, if you like, that we actually operate within, then it's a matter of the thought process around changing your own story becomes a very powerful one. Often I'll ask clients, what's your life like? I was actually asked this question several years ago, and they said, well, what was your life like? And I said, I've always been a jack of all trades. Now, I don't know if you know the cliche, but it's a jack of all trades, master of none. And I made a decision that day that I could be a jack of all trades and a master of that which I choose, if I'm willing to do what it takes to get there. Because there are some things that I have no desire to be a master of, or masterful in the pursuit of. Computer science, for example, computers are incredible things and they're wonderful. I love using them. I love what I can do with them. I have no interest in becoming a master expert software engineer. No interest. I'll pay someone else to do that, whatever that means. It's a matter of, but it did give me from that moment on the freedom to say, well, I'm a jack of all trades and I choose to master this or that. And that's where I'm going to put my attention. And, to yourself, to all of the listeners, actually, how would you describe yourself? My life is like, or I am like, or from my past experience, this seems to be true for me. Well, definitely put the seems in there, because it seems to be true from your perspective, but from other people's, it can be quite different. I work with a lot of people that are working as hypnotists or NLP practitioners or other therapies of different kinds. And the resounding number of them, the majority by far, say to me, well, I'm sure I'd be better at this if my voice doesn't sound the way it does. And I'll be like, well, what's wrong with your voice? I say, I don't like the way my voice sounds. I'm like, well, there's the first thing we need to update, because if I didn't like the way your voice sounds, I would have told you. I am honest enough to do that. Further from that, what if you're wrong? What if people like the sound of your voice? What about that person that married you? Maybe they like your voice. Ask your friends. And quite often in fact, almost every time, their perception of their voice is very different to other people's perception. And when they become friends with their own voice, they begin to express themselves a lot more clearly, a lot more confidently, and a lot more enjoyably. Because if you're listening to yourself all day and you don't like what you hear, it's time to change something.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be your voice. It could be the way you're listening to it. Just a thought, but both can happen.
No, that's great, Orlando. Thanks very much. And the next question as well, it kind of toys in, you kind of did explain this already, but can maybe give examples of where you've used metaphors before with clients, even just one or two that for a takeaway,
Well, I'll give you a couple with different perspectives. The first one, and I know that you know a lot about this as well, Mark, is in NLP is the techniques or skills surrounding timelines. Mm. Now, timelines, for listeners that may not have heard of this, it's a metaphor for how we sort time inside our mind. And it's as simple as this. Imagine a line, and at one end is the future, and at one end is the past. From where you're sitting, which direction is the future? Does it go out in front of you? Is it behind you? Is it to the left or to the right? And which direction is the past? Now, wherever you answer, you're right, because in this moment, that's where you're imagining it. Okay. Now, the moment someone can visualize or is imagining a future and a line that goes towards the future and back to the past, at that moment, you can ask them spatially, you can ask yourself, well, how far does that future timeline go? Well, if it goes 3 feet, I would suggest that you stretch it a heck of a lot further and start planning for a much longer life. If the past is very short, stretch it out so that you got space to look back and learn from your past and take what's useful from it. If the future is difficult to see and you're squinting and it's dark, imagine some lights in there. Turn the brightness up. You may as well have a bright future if you're going to look at a future. And if it's going straight up, well, level it out a little. The immediate future just does not need to be that difficult, your imagination. Mm. Now, a lot of this starts sounding a little airy-fairy, but when you slow it down and do it individually with people, the reality is we represent things inside our mind somehow. Mm. So when given a framework for how to represent time that is on a line, it gives you the ability to start changing the way that you're planning. It can give some incredible insights and be a wonderful tool for moving around or changing misaligned procrastination. Because procrastination is actually a fantastic tool. Anyone out there that procrastinates, congratulations. If it's not useful to you, it's only because you're procrastinating the things that you do not want to procrastinate. For example, if a client wants to stop eating sugary food, if they were able to put it off till later, then that would be a wonderful thing for them. But if there's a task that's going to be beneficial for your life that you're just not getting around to, well, that's a different thing. That's something that wants to go into the other category. So you take the unuseful things and procrastinate those, and you stop procrastinating the things that are useful. And there's different tools that you can do with timelines, but the idea of a timeline, the entire concept of that in NLP and in any other therapy, it's a product of the person's imagination. It's a metaphor. There's a very famous couple of lines documented by a certain fellow who was looking at a line of light. He was sitting on a photon of light, and when he looked across at himself on another photon of light and shone a torch, time and space became relative. This is a thought experiment that Einstein is very famous for, and it came out with one of the many equations that he produced in his lifetime, which, so in some respects now is useful, some not so much. However, in saying that, massive leaps forward were taken with respect to that equation and others that he did. And it all came from a thought experiment, which is another way of defining closing his eyes and imagining stuff. Because that's, it's not normal to think about physicists sitting down in a chair with their eyes closed, imagining a beam of light. Surely they should have instruments and some important things in front of them. But the imagination is where thinking is done. Mm-hmm. Thinking is the creative skill. It's in the present and the present and future tense, and remembering is done in the past. We get the resources from the past, we put them together in a different way, and that's called thinking in the present, and then we project that out and see how that would work. Well, that's looking to see how the changes would work in the future. This is the essence of creativity and thinking, and it's a good plan. Mm-hmm. So timelines are one of very often used metaphors in work that I do with clients. I work with a lot of people with things that come down to, or issues, problems that come down to time management or a lack thereof, and overuse of procrastination. So timelines are a great way to work around them. Another metaphor, which is a little more direct in storytelling that I like to use, is the story of the rucksack. Now, if you've got a rucksack and you're carrying it around and it's heavy, it does pay to have a look at what's inside. And you might notice that there's sand and there's stone and there's rocks. And those different rocks can be different larger things in your life. The stones are smaller things and the sand is everything else in between. And if you're not sure yet of what can change and how quickly, you could simply put the rucksack on and not notice that a tiny hole is worn in the back. And as you're walking up the hill along the beach, wherever you guide the client to walking, every now and then they notice that the rucksack just seems to be getting lighter. So they stop and they take off the rucksack. And when they open it up, they notice that the level of sand has decreased from the little hole. It's just gone. And some of the more obvious problems that are there, they just don't fit anymore. There are certain rocks that now they have no value. In the past, they looked like they were wonderful, but now it's just a rock. So you don't have to throw it away. You don't have to get rid of it, but it makes sense to put it on the side of the path so you do not trip over it. Just fasten up the rucksack and carry on going. As you take the rocks out, you could pick fruit, you could pick other things and put more useful things inside your rucksack to help you with your journey. Different resources that are going to keep you strong, keep you alive, and allow you to grow and thrive through the journey that is your life. And I really like that rucksack idea because it's something that you can carry with you. Often in cliche, something that's carried around by people as baggage. Well, what's in the bag? There was a game show. It's in the bag. Money or the bag? Well, you know, what's in the bag? That's the ultimate question. Do you want the money or the bag? Well, it depends on what's in the bag. But it's only a little bag, and there's 1,000 pounds on offer. But what if it's a little bag of diamonds? What if it's a little bag full of business ideas which are going to make that 1,000 pounds look irrelevant in 10 minutes? You know? Well, if people are carrying luggage, rather than having to dive into the problems, how about you just open up the luggage metaphor, just inside your mind, not for real, of course, just inside your mind. What color's the bag? Is it a suitcase or, you know, okay, it's a suitcase, it's orange, it's old school. Well, open up the baggage. What's in there that does not fit anymore? Now, if you let your mind simply allocate certain items of clothes to represent the problems that we're not discussing directly, and you were to simply take them out, pop them in the metaphorical clothing bin that you cannot re-enter, and then close the bag and carry on walking, how much lighter would your journey feel, no longer carrying items that they belonged in the past. And now that you've walked past the clothing bin along your timeline into the future, the clothing bin contains the clothes where they belong. Those things that don't fit are now in the past. You know the best thing about the past?
It's over.
It's over. So you get to look forward to what's ahead, no longer weighed down by things that are not necessary, not useful, and not desirable in your life at this moment. You can simply take that bag, and now that you've got space in that bag, you can put something wonderful inside. You know, like someone's heart. Not literally, metaphorically, of course. That's a different thing.
Well, that's a brilliant example, Orlando. Thanks very much. That's an excellent example. Yeah, great.
And again, look, you know, if any of this is resonating to the listeners about different metaphors and what they like about these particular ones we're discussing, or others they can think of, one of the easiest ways to give yourself a coaching session, quite frankly, is take a little time out for yourself. That's step number one. Actually allocate yourself half an hour where you're going to do something for yourself without interruption. Number two, get a pen and paper or a recorder, a phone, whatever, and either tell the story verbally or write it down, whichever is your preference. Tell the story about what's going on for you. You don't even have to use your own name. You can write a fairy tale about it. You can write an adventure about it. But what's it like for you? And once you've got that, either if it's recorded, transcribe it. I do suggest definitely typing it out. And once you've got it there in writing, read through it and decide, is this what you want the story of your life to be reflected as? And if not, you can either rewrite the entire story how you want it to be and make the changes that you need to do to get to that. Or if you're not quite ready to do that, you can simply go through the story and go, what's one thing that I can amend in this story that would make the next week better? What's just one little element of this story? So if part of the story is feeling like they're carrying the weight of the world around on their shoulders, imagine what it would feel like if they carried the world minus the water.
Great, yeah.
There's a lot of water on the world. So that's a big weight decrease. But if they've grown up with the belief that they have to work really hard to have anything useful in their life, well, they can carry around the world for a little longer without the water, and then keep carrying the water, but take off all the vegetation and animals and everything that's on the surface, and then keep carrying the world, but take out everything but the core of the earth. Yeah. And then in the fifth week, if they want to drag out happiness until then, in the fifth week, they can get rid of the core and just keep one little atom as a reminder of how powerful they were at a time in their life that they, no matter, even when the entire world was on their shoulders, it still didn't stop them. They kept going. And if you can keep going when you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and then you can make changes over 5 weeks, if you can do that, what else can you do?
Yeah, that's great. That's great takeaway for anybody that's listening. That's brilliant. Orlando, thanks very much. Brilliant, yeah. Because make it lighter every so often. Keep making it lighter.
Well, lighten up.
Yeah,
exactly. Whether you've got to put the weight down or you got to turn the brightness up, lighten up, man.
Yeah, great stuff. Great. That's brilliant. And just one last thing, Orlando, this is great. Would you use metaphors with every client that you work with yourself?
I do. Yes, I do. I do in natural language, and I do as a conscious choice as well. Yeah. Purely because, in my experience, it makes the job easier for the client. And to me, if people are determined to do it the hard way, that's their choice, but they've got to do it quickly. So they can either do it the hard way and really fast, or they can do it the easy, fun way and do it fast. I'm just too impatient. I'm not willing to wait weeks and months and years for someone to get through, past and over something that they can get rid of very quickly. In every client session that I have, or every group of sessions in coaching, the first one's always tidy time. And I mean that in the sense that anyone that comes to see me has always got something that if it wasn't in the way, they'd be able to progress quicker. So we tidy up something in that respect, and then we get on with what it is they want to enhance about themselves. And that in itself is a metaphor. When I say tidy time, most people have a reference for that in their mind. It's usually at a younger time when they've been told it's time to tidy up. But once things are tidy and put away, you're ready for the next adventure. You're ready to take the next step. You can do something else. And, to take the next step, what does that actually mean? Does it mean you're actually going to take a physical step, or you're going to do something, or you're going to plan? Well, it can mean all of those things. It could just be a metaphor. I'm a big fan of working with people to make a good plan when they are in an excellent state mentally and physically. And that provides multiple benefits. That includes, number one, you're making a good plan when you're as resourceful as you can be, so it's the best plan you can make at the time. One of the byproducts from it is, in a few days, in a week, in a month, if you're just having a really crappy day where life's difficult and everything's hard, you can rely on the fact in your mind that you made that plan when you're in a good state of mind. So even in your worst moment, if all you can do is look down, put one step, one foot just in front of the other, and just keep going for that one day, it doesn't matter how slow. Once that day is over, once that problem is past, they can still know they kept moving forward. It might have only been a tiny bit, but they're closer to their goal. They've learned from the hardship, the problem, whatever it was, and now they can get back to full speed and keep taking big steps and moving forward to what they want. But of course, that would have to be a metaphor, because they're now taking big steps instead of little steps on the journey that is their life, or whatever it is that they want to do.
Yeah.
You know, to me, life is metaphorical.
Yeah.
That's how I view the world, and therefore it's how I work with clients. Being very clear as well that metaphor doesn't mean airy fairy tale story. You know, it's being able to clearly feel good and act in a way that you want to act in the world, so that you can be who you want to be, doing what you want to be doing. And it's the metaphors are a phenomenally excellent way of building people, situations, and things towards what they actually want for the future. And they're good fun too.
Yeah. No, that's great, because that makes sense to use them all the time. Because that's brilliant, because you're kind of getting their story and helping them with stories. So that's brilliant. So, because would you like to kind of just mention what you do on a Thursday again for people that are listening? You know, the meetup, the NLP meetup for people that are listening, Orlando.
Absolutely. Every Thursday evening for this week will be number 78 in a row.
Wow.
Every Thursday I host an open NLP hypnosis meetup, where every week we choose a topic in the realms of NLP or hypnosis, and we discuss it and we play with the ideas. Sometimes we do an exercise together. Sometimes we go into breakout rooms and do it. But a wonderful group of people that are all very similar or like-minded, that are looking to improve themselves in what they do, whatever that is. A whole range of different people. There is no entry level. It's purely, if anyone has an interest in learning, they are absolutely welcome, and they can get hold of me via email or contacting yourself, Mark.
Yeah, because I shared your email on the last podcast, so people know. So he's nowhere to get in touch with Orlando. So definitely, I'd vouch for it's a brilliant experience. So thanks very much for that, Orlando, for keeping it going.
Oh, you're very welcome, Mark, and I'll see you tonight.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, exactly. Good stuff. Yeah, but so listen, thanks a million for coming on again, Orlando. Talking about metaphor was brilliant. I really enjoyed it, because I love the subject. It's really close to my heart, the metaphor. but listen, thanks very much, and we're going to do this next Thursday again. We'll pick another subject and we can talk about it. So once again, if anybody has anything you want us to discuss, do you like to hear Orlando discuss? You know what to do. Email us, and we'll certainly do that.
Fantastic.
Have you anything else to say before we go?
No, I think we're about done for this evening. But thank you everyone for tuning in. We certainly look forward to providing some value to you. So just to reiterate what Mark was saying, if you've got something that you'd like to hear more about, or if something's piqued your interest from a previous episode, get hold of Mark. You know what to do. Send him an email, and we'll do our best to provide something useful.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So listen, thanks a million for listening to today's podcast, Mark's Motivational Podcast. Your host, Mark Lestrange, with Orlando Zucchetto every Thursday. So take care and have a really great weekend. Okay, thank you. Cheers.